Hey, it's Luminostic. We are now in Montanita, Ecuador on the beach. So our first, my first time seeing wild iguanas today. That was really trippy. Speaking of trippy, I realized that I haven't yet done any videos about psilocybin mushrooms on this channel. So today I'm going to get a little bit into the background, where they can be found, the effects that they have, and some anecdotal reports from my own experience. So do me a favor, hit the like button, subscribe, support us on Patreon. I'd really like to make this channel all about the content that is really suitable for the diehard watchers and not have to worry so much about SEO rankings and whatnot. So do support us on Patreon. I feel like I can deliver better value to you if that's where our income is coming from. Psilocybin mushrooms are found on every continent except for Antarctica. There's even been a single specimen found way up in Telluride in the Rocky Mountains. They typically tend to bruise blue, which is the oxidization of the psychoactive constituent psilocin. Also, the psilocybin, it's not really a misnomer because there is psilocybin, but the active constituent is actually the psilocin. The psilocybin is converted in the body into psilocin. And this blue chemical is what is responsible for the psychoactive properties of the mushroom. So the psilocybin mushroom first came into the awareness of Western civilization when Gordon Wasson and his wife became aware that there were people in South America and in other places that considered the mushroom sacred, and they wanted to know why. And so they went to Mexico and they met with a curandera who gave them a whopping dose of psilocybin mushrooms. And so Wasson decided that it made sense to send the mushrooms to someone at Harvard in psychology, and so that's kind of how Timothy Leary became aware of the psychedelic mushroom. He flew down to, I think, Cuernavaca, Mexico. They rented a big house. They had a bunch of intellectuals from Harvard, psychology professors and the like, and that was kind of actually the catalyst for the entire psychedelic movement as we know it today. This is kind of the chain of events that basically that and discovery of LSD by Albert Hofmann a few years earlier. On top of being found on nearly every continent, they're found in a lot of different habitats as well. It's a common misconception that all psilocybin mushrooms are dung-loving mushrooms. That's actually not true. In fact, the majority of the most potent psilocybin mushrooms are wood rotters. On the west coast of the United States, in California, Oregon, Washington, are found cyanescens and azurescens, which are extremely potent as well as liberty caps. Also, I found that the wood rotter species, I personally find it a more lucid experience with more depth, and some of the characters a little bit more similar to a DMT experience. And I think that could be because of the higher levels of baeocystine, which is a third psychoactive constituent in the mushrooms. That I don't know that much is known about it, but it does seem to me that there's a correlation between higher levels and a difference in the effect. Actually, the most potent by dry weight are azurescens, which are wood rotters, cyanescens, which are also wood rotters, and they grow in lignin-rich grasses. The highest concentration of psilocybin and psilocin ever found in a single mushroom specimen was in a liberty cap. But on average, the azurescens is the most potent, followed by the cyanescens. Pinealis cyanescen is a different cyanescen that's extremely potent. It is a contender for the number 2 spot. It's found in the tropics, actually in Ecuador. I found a few of them, and they are actually dung-loving. The research has shown that the psilocybin is actually capable of regenerating damaged brain cells, which is something that previous to these studies, neurologists believed to be impossible. That once a brain cell was damaged, or a neuro connection had shriveled, that it would that you could not really repair this. So that is a tremendous discovery, and the full implications of that have not really been revealed because it's been fairly recently. But this shows particularly high promise in the area of depression and PTSD. What they specifically noticed is that brain cells that had been shriveled due to the effects of depression sort of regenerated and came back to life. So also memory. Researchers, I think at Princeton, said that 5 hours of psilocybin was not only the equivalent of 5 years of therapy, but also permanently enhanced memory. Subjects that were tested again 5 years after the studies showed sustained improvement in their emotional state and in their capacity for memory. So, all right, let's move on to some of my personal experiences with the effects of the psilocybin mushrooms. I probably ate them for the first time in high school. And honestly, the first experience wasn't that dramatic. I'd taken LSD and stuff before, but the second or third time, I decided that I was going to take what Terence McKenna described as a heroic dose, which was 5 grams, and I was growing them myself. So I actually took 7 grams of dried mushrooms, Psilocybe cubensis, the Amazonas variety, and about 35 minutes in, I guess, I realized I was definitely really in for it. Basically, the wall in my apartment kind of vanished, and there was suddenly this face. I actually have this kind of crude tattoo of the face that appeared on the wall. This was the earth, kind of where its third eye was, and it began speaking to me in something that I described kind of as like Morse code, but it was like silence with greater patches of silence between the silence. And somehow I understood it all perfectly clearly. Interestingly, many years later, I read about an entity that Aleister Crowley, the Victorian magician, described, and he said that its voice was silence. And I kind of wondered, was this the thing? So, anyways, this thing had a message for me. We were kind of talking about my questions about the great mysteries of life, and it said, well, I have something that I will show you. These are your origins. And it disappeared. In its place, there was a massive spaceship that spanned from, as far as I could see, which was, thousands of miles, apparently. Everywhere I looked, basically, I was just under this giant ship. And it was made of living organic material. It had, like, what would be pipes, I guess, that were, like blood vessels. And that vanished, and, the rest of the experience was just like a high dose of, any one of the other psychedelic shifting patterns. And but that was the first time that I really had this encounter with what Terence McKenna described as like the alien other. And this is an experience I think that is pretty common with psilocybin mushrooms. In fact, it's interesting that researchers have determined that psilocybin, LSD, mescaline, DMT, they all work on the same receptor sites. So the fact that these experiences with these different plants and entheogens like LSD have very distinct personalities is something that is not very well understood, because they're just sitting in the same serotonin receptors. But it's a very common description that there's this like sense of humor to the personality of the mushroom, and something very intergalactic, lots of like alien vibes, I guess. Another really powerful experience that I had with the mushrooms, this was, I was young and kind of foolish, and I was determined to have these like megadose experiences and try to really pierce the veil and see how far I could go, and what could be learned and brought back. And so I was in Colorado this time, and a friend of mine had grown a bunch of psilocybin mushrooms, and they weren't quite dry, so we didn't really know how much we were eating. So we filled these burritos, and I remember, there was cheese in it, but it was mostly mushrooms, and it was, probably, at least a foot long, and it was big. It was a really large burrito. And for some reason, even though my body started to kind of reject it, like stop eating this, I just kept forcing it down until I consumed almost all of it. And I don't really remember much. And this is kind of, the warning story about, having respect and being cautious. because I basically lost consciousness, and my body was still walking around doing things, interacting with people, but I was on a spaceship with some guys talking about the fate of the planet, which we'll get to. But later I was told that everyone knew that I had gone off the edge of the abyss. My girlfriend at the time asked me to get her a glass of water, and she said that I came back with Parmesan cheese, and she said, that's not water. So I said, oh no, and took the top of the thing off and dumped the Parmesan cheese on the floor. So from what I gather, I was basically just, kind of running around being mischievous and kind of obnoxious. I wasn't really like endangering anyone or myself, but everyone else had eaten most of a burrito that size, not quite as much as me, so they were barely hanging on too. But this is the important part. So my consciousness, the experience that I was aware of, had absolutely nothing to do with what was actually happening here. I suddenly found myself sitting on a spaceship with some guys in business suits. And it was unique in all of my psychedelic experiences in that it was indistinguishable from normal reality. Usually when you close your eyes and you see these mandalas and you're like hyperdimensional astral traveling or whatever, you know that it's the psychedelic realm. It has that look. The geometries are shifting in a certain way, and each one of these psychedelics usually has there's a certain kind of aesthetic to the geometry. There's a speed consistent. Mescaline tends to be faster, and sort of different colors, hues, and stuff. And none of that at all. It was completely normal. And I was sitting at a desk with these two guys that I knew to be some kind of interdimensional alien beings. And I said, why are you guys dressed like that? And they said, well, the important thing actually right now is to not distract you. Because we just need you to pay attention to what we're talking about. This is just a form that is irrelevant. And we can take whatever form we want, and this is the one we've chosen. But let's try to stay on track here. And I was like, okay, fair enough. So they said, we know you're concerned about things that are going on your planet, the Patriot Act and all that. This was 2001, right after 9/11 and all that. It may have been 2002, but it wasn't too long after 9/11, probably a few months. And so, the Patriot Act and all that stuff was going on. And of course, I was part of the, far left contingent of conspiracy people saying, this is not good. They're taking away all of our rights. And, what is about to happen? They're creating wars under false pretenses. We could tell there was some shit going down that didn't smell right. And so they said, we just want to tell you, that you shouldn't really worry about all that stuff, because there are intergalactic treaties, basically agreements between these different races and from different planets and different even dimensions, that one of the rules, and this is the important one that is most applicable to this situation, is that we cannot intervene until a species is actually in danger of totally destroying itself. And don't worry, when you get to that point, which is pretty close, we'll be there. And so this conversation may have gone on for a few more minutes, but then they said, well, you know what, you're not going to like it very much when you get back, so we're going to let you have some fun for a minute. And I didn't really like the sound of that very much, but it is what it is. And so they opened up the back of the spaceship, and I went flying out, riding on an electric guitar like a witch on a broomstick. And there was a wave, I guess you could think of it, of pure sound, and that's what I was kind of surfing on the guitar. And Jerry Garcia flies up beside me, and he says, and he's riding his guitar, and he says, this is what I do now, and he zooms off. And then I feel like I'm being tackled, but I can't really tell what exactly. It's like I flashed into this reality and had the distinct impression of being pushed to the ground and tackled. And I thought that was a bit weird. So the next thing I remember, I was opening my eyes in a room, and I looked over and I saw, oh no, first I saw this crude drawing of a naked woman in pencil above me, and I remembered that reality is vibration, and that consciousness can control vibration. So if I just make the right sound, I can change reality. Because I think intuitively, on some level, I knew that I wasn't in a good place. And at first I thought that I'd wandered from the apartment down into the laundry room, and then I saw the toilet, and I realized that there are no toilets in the laundry room. So I began to howl and make these sounds, and it appeared to me that I was succeeding. The pencil drawing would kind of morph and start to change into something else, so I'd get kind of encouraged, and I would howl even crazier and weirder, and every now and then the cops would look through the little glass thing, and they're like, what is this guy doing in there? You know, so I did end up in jail, and it wasn't a big deal. I guess I just had wandered out into the area in the apartment, like the common area, and some cops had noticed and came up and tried to talk to me, and I had apparently, when I ended up going to court, it was really surreal, because the judge said, okay, well, what were you arrested for? And I said, well, I'm not entirely sure. And he says, well, it says here resisting arrest and disturbing the peace. And then he's like, so officer, you know, the cop has to come and talk, and what exactly was the issue here? And they said, well, Mr. Donnelly was reciting some poetry to us, and here's an excerpt, and he had actually written down some of the things that I was saying. It was pretty good, you know, it was really psychedelic and bizarre, and so I just kind of looked at the judge and I said, apparently it sounds like I was tackled and arrested for just being too weird. And that's, you know, I don't generally make it a habit to be a problem in the community, and it doesn't really sound like I had done anything, you know. So point being that, you know, it wasn't like a major problem or anything, but definitely watch your dosage. That's a big takeaway from this, but probably the most interesting thing that ties it all together, and this is where these experiences really get their importance. Because, you know, if you have these imaginary, fantastical flights and it means nothing, then, I mean, who cares? You know, it's entertainment, it's kind of fun. But I think most of us that take entheogens are looking for something deeper. And in this case, that something deeper came many years later. And if you guys have watched my ayahuasca and the Star Tribes video, you know that this theme of intergalactic communication has continued up until the present time. So many years later, after I met the native spiritual leaders that constitute the Star Tribes hierarchy, I guess. A few weeks after the meeting that we had in New Mexico, I got a call from one of the high priestesses, and she said that she had had a dream where she had gone on board a spaceship, and some guys in business suits told her that she shouldn't worry about the Patriot Act, and basically the same exact spiel that I was given on the spaceship. She described the guys exactly the same way and told me that when she woke up, she felt compelled to call me and tell me the story. And so, you know, I can't say exactly what to make of that, but considering everything else, it's almost like the universe is kind of trying to show me over time, you know, that these interdimensional beings, these intelligences that are communicating with us through these plants and funguses, and also through our dreams, and you know, something I've noticed lately in my next video about the Phoenix process. I'll get into this in some detail, but you know, after you've had these experiences, even in these altered states of the collective consciousness, you'll start to see it without the substances, and so you know, that's really the important thing. I think that once we expand the capacity of our mind, we have these experiences when we can't help it. They can return to us in our normal state and actually become of some utility, and also can sort of help us to understand that these things that we're experiencing in these altered states have some validity. I think one of the big takeaways from that is that these altered states help us to perceive functions of our consciousness that were not previously perceptible. I think, you know, they're always there and they're always available, but it's like we have these filters. Actually, something interesting, I just found out that Aldous Huxley, I'd forgotten about this. I thought that more recently, you know, Dennis McKenna had posited this theory that the nervous system has filters that screen out the vast majority of the universe. Huxley called it a reducing valve. And I think that one of the big tricks here is that, during the psychedelic experience, the reducing valve is turned sometimes even all the way off, which is maybe a little bit too much for most people. You end up blacked out in a police station if you, turn it off all the way. But the point being, once it's been pulled back a few times, it never really closes. And this has a number of practical advantages, and it's a catalyst to spiritual development, because the experience of the universe as one collective mind, all people, all beings, everything, it's very different to hear, we're all one and all that sort of talk from mystics and the Buddha and Jesus or whatever. But once you've actually had objective experience of transcendental unity, it's just a lot more powerful than just, reading something in a book and thinking that it sounds nice and wanting to believe it. I have spoken about ayahuasca and telepathy in the past. Also, I think, it's important for me to mention that I have experienced telepathy outside of any kind of entheogenic experience or plant ceremony. It's just, it's much more reliably induced with something like ayahuasca. But actually the first and one of the most impressive experiences that I have had with telepathy was a very small dose of mushrooms. I hadn't taken very much at all. A friend of mine had eaten them as well, and we were separated, and there was something really important going on. And we were way up high in the mountains, and felt like I needed to go and deal with this thing on my own. So I walked off up into the mountains, and I had this outrageous conversation with what I perceived to be God at the time. And I don't really feel like I should repeat what was said there, but it was profound and bizarre. And then, when it was over, I came walking down off the mountain, and it was this whole series of events. It doesn't really matter the specifics. And after maybe an hour and a half or so, I ran into my friend again, and she was crying, and she knew every single thought that had gone through my head verbatim, word for word, absolutely everything I had done. She knew that I'd gone to the car and tried to get my clothes because I was cold and didn't have the keys. And I mean, it was like, she was following me around with a camera that also had a microphone in my head and literally picked up every thought that I had and everything that I saw. And the interesting part about that, or one of the interesting things, is that when I asked her, how do you know all this? All she said was they were narrating it to me. So not only did she, have this extremely accurate report on everything I've been doing for an hour and a half, she claimed that it was kind of being dictated to her. And I haven't actually tried to, I never pressed her for more information, like who were they, or I just kind of was like, okay, and there was a lot of really strange stuff going on at the time, so I guess I was kind of used to taking stuff like that in stride. And interestingly, speaking of this experience of the collective consciousness, this person was present during most of the experiences that I had during what I call the Phoenix process, and this is actually the person that gave me the name, the Phoenix process, to use. And I have not spoken to her in 10 years, and a few days after I decided to start making the Phoenix video, we started talking again, just sort of out of nowhere. And so, that's the kind of thing that I think we're really working towards here, these kind of experiences of confirmation and development along these lines of collective consciousness becoming like the standard instead of the exception. Psilocybin mushrooms, excellent cure for depression, long-term benefits, memory enhancement. I think I forgot to mention that the researchers also said that a 55-year-old brain, because of the increase in neuro-plasticity, will start to learn at the same rate as a 5-year-old again. Probably the best known treatment for depression. And if you've watched my psychedelics and addiction video, I go into some detail about this, but I just watched another documentary the other night. They talked about another study specifically with smoking, and they said that psilocybin mushrooms were by far the most, that one single treatment had been enough for, I think it was 90% of cigarette smokers to stop for 5 years or so. So far and above the most effective treatment for addiction. I think this probably goes for all drugs. you know, and I think there are different plant medicines that probably work better for different drugs. Like, you know, everybody knows about ibogaine and heroin, um, but you know, for depression and definitely for cigarettes and alcohol, psilocybin and LSD have shown tremendous benefit. Experience of telepathy, um, visions of transcendental beauty, and of course, you know, approach them with respect because they are just as powerful as ayahuasca, potentially, or DMT. If you eat too many, you can black out and get yourself into some trouble. You don't want to do that. So be safe and have respect, and you know, happy travels. Do me a favor, hit the like button, subscribe, support us on Patreon, and we'll see you in a few days.